Good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of The Longing. It's a little earlier in the day than usual, but I'm going to be out this evening, so I'm doing it slightly earlier. So, let's continue to read The Sleeper Awakes. Asano shrugged his shoulders. We had better get towards the council house, he cried. That is where they will swarm. Even now the ruins may be impassable. Graham regarded him doubtfully and followed him. They went up the stepped platforms to the swiftest one, and there Asano accosted a labourer. The answers to his questions were in the thick, vulgar speech. What did he say? Asked Graham. He knows little, but he told me that the Black Police would have arrived here before the people knew. Had not someone in the Wind Vane offices learnt? He said a girl. A girl? Not... He said a girl. He did not know who she was, who came out from the council house crying aloud and told the men at work among the ruins. And then another thing was shouted, something that turned an aimless tumult into determinate movements. It came like a wind along the street. To your wards! To your wards! Every man get arms, every man to his ward. Chapter 22. The Struggle in the Council House. As Asano and Graham hurried along to the ruins about the council house, they saw everywhere the excitement of the people rising. To your wards! To your wards! Everywhere men and women in blue were hurrying from unknown subterranean employments, up the staircases of the middle path. At one place Graham saw an arsenal of the Revolutionary Committee besieged by a crowd of shouting men. At another, a couple of men in the hated yellow uniform of the Labour Police, pursued by a gathering crowd, fled precipitately along the swift way that went in the opposite direction. The cries of "To your wards" became at last a continuous shouting as they drew near the government quarter. Many of the shouts were unintelligible. "Ostrog has betrayed us," one man bawled in a hoarse voice, again and again, dinning that refrain into Graham's ear until it haunted him. This person stayed close beside Graham and Asano on the swift way, shouting to the people who swarmed on the lower platforms as he rushed past them. His cry about Ostrog alternated with some incomprehensible all orders. Presently he went leaping down and disappeared. Graham's mind was filled with the din. His plans were vague and unformed. He had one picture of some commanding position from which he could address the multitudes, another of meeting Ostrog face to face. He was full of rage, of tense muscular excitement. His hands gripped, his lips were pressed together. The way to the council house across the ruins was impassable, but Asano met that difficulty and took Graham into the premises of the central post office. The post office was nominally at work, but the blue-clothed porters moved sluggishly, or had stopped to stare through the arches of their galleries at the shouting men who were going by outside. Every man to his ward! Every man to his ward! Here, by Asano's advice, Graham revealed his identity. They crossed to the council house by a cable cradle. Already in the brief interval since the capitulation of the councillors, a great change had been wrought in the appearance of the ruins. The spurting cascades of the ruptured seawater mains had been captured and tamed, and huge temporary pipes ran overhead along a flimsy-looking fabric of girders. The sky was laced with restored cables and wires that served the council house, and a mass of new fabric with cranes and other building machines going to and fro upon it projected to the left of the white pile. The moving ways that ran across this area had been restored, albeit for once running under the open sky. These were the ways that Graham had seen from the little balcony in the hour of his awakening, not 9 days since, and the hall of his trance had been on the further side, where now shapeless piles of smashed and shattered masonry were heaped together. It was already high day, and the sun was shining brightly. Out of their tall caverns of blue electric light came the swift ways crowded with multitudes of people, who poured off them and gathered even denser over the wreckage and confusion of the ruins. The air was full of their shouting, and they were pressing and swaying towards the central building. For the most part, that shouting mass consisted of shapeless swarms, but here and there Graham could see that a rude discipline struggled to establish itself. And every voice clamoured for order in the chaos. To your wards, every man to his ward. The cable carried them into a hall which Graham recognised as the antechamber to the Hall of the Atlas, about the gallery of which he had walked days ago with Howard to show himself to the vanished council, an hour from his awakening. Now the place was empty, except for 2 cable attendants. These men seemed hugely astonished to recognise the sleeper in the man who swung down from the cross seat. "Where is Ostrog?" he demanded. "I must see Ostrog forthwith. He has disobeyed me. I have come back to take things out of his hands." Without waiting for Asano, he went straight across the place, ascended the steps at the further end, and, pulling the curtain aside, found himself facing the perpetually labouring Titan. The hall was empty. Its appearance had changed very greatly since his first sight of it. It had suffered serious injury in the violent struggle of the first outbreak. On the right-hand side of the great figure, the upper half of the wall had been torn away for nearly 200 feet of its length, and a sheet of the same glassy film that had enclosed Graham at his awakening had been drawn across the gap. This deadened but did not altogether exclude the roar of the people outside. "Wards, wards, wards," they seemed to be saying. Through it there were visible the beams and supports of metal scaffoldings that rose and fell according to the requirements of a great crowd of workmen, an idle building machine with lank arms of red, painted metal, stretched gauntly across the green-tinted picture. On it were still a number of workmen, staring at the crowd below. For a moment he stood regarding these things, and Asano overtook him. "Ostrog," said Asano, "will be in the small offices beyond there." The little man looked livid now, and his eyes searched Graham's face. They had scarcely advanced 10 paces from the curtain before a little panel to the left of the Atlas rolled up, and Ostrog, accompanied by Lincoln and followed by 2 black and yellow-clad, appeared across the remote corner of the hall towards a second panel that was raised and open. "Ostrog," shouted Graham, and at the sound of his voice the little party turned astonished. Ostrog said something to Lincoln, and advanced alone. Graham was the first to speak. His voice was loud and dictatorial. "What is this I hear?" he asked. "Are you bringing here to keep the people down?" "It is none too soon," said Ostrog. "They have been getting out of hand more and more since the revolt. I underestimated. Do you mean that these infernal are on the way?" "On the way. As it is, you have seen the people outside?" "No wonder. But after what was said, you have taken too much on yourself, Ostrog." Ostrog said nothing, but drew nearer. "These must not come to London," said Graham. "I am master, and they shall not come." Ostrog glanced at Lincoln, who at once came towards them with his 2 attendants close behind him. "Why not?" said Ostrog. "White men must be mastered by white men. Besides, they are only an instrument. But that is not the question. I am the master. I mean to be the master. And I tell you, these shall not come. The people, I believe in the people. Because you are an anachronism. You are a man out of the past, an accident. You are owner, perhaps, of the world, nominally, legally. But you are not master. You do not know enough to be master." He glanced at Lincoln again. "I know now what you think. I can guess something of what you mean to do. Even now it is not too late to warn you. You dream of human equality, of some sort of socialistic order. You have all those worn-out dreams of the 19th century, fresh and vivid in your mind, and you would rule this age that you do not understand." "Listen," said Graham. You can hear it, a sound like the sea. Not voices, but a voice. Do you altogether understand? We taught them that, said Ostrog. Perhaps. Can you teach them to forget it? But enough of this. These must not come. There was a pause, and Ostrog looked him in the eyes. They will, he said. I forbid it, said Graham. They have started. I will not have it. No, said Ostrog. Sorry, as I am to follow the method of the council. For your own good you must not side with disorder. And now that you are here, it was kind of you to come here. Lincoln laid his hand on Graham's shoulder. Abruptly, Graham realized the enormity of his blunder in coming to the council house. He turned towards the curtains that separated the hall from the antechamber. The clutching hand of Asano intervened. In another moment, Lincoln had grasped Graham's cloak. He turned and struck at Lincoln's face, and incontinently had him by collar and arm. He wrenched himself away, his sleeve torn noisily, and he stumbled back, to be tripped by another attendant. Then he struck the ground heavily, and was staring at the distant ceiling of the hall. He shouted, rolled over, struggling fiercely, clutched an attendant's leg and threw him headlong, and struggled to his feet. Lincoln appeared before him, went down heavily again with a blow under the point of the jaw, and lay still. Graham made 2 strides, stumbled, and then Ostrog's arm was round his neck. He was pulled over backward, fell heavily, and his arms were pinned to the ground. After a few violent efforts, he ceased to struggle, and lay staring at Ostrog's heaving throat. You are a prisoner, panted Ostrog, exulting. You were rather a fool to come back. Graham turned his head about and perceived through the irregular green window in the walls of the hall the men who had been working the building cranes, gesticulating excitedly to the people below them. They had seen. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. Quite a bit of racism in this one, so apologies for that. Anyway. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.